I recognize the member for Timiskaming Cochrane.
Thank you, Speaker. It's always an honor to speak in the House, particularly on a day and an issue like today. And before I go too far, I'd like to mention that I would like to share my time with the member from Scarborough Southwest. I listened very intently. I respect this place. I respect the people in it. I would like to welcome the people in the galleries, particularly the gentleman who survived the Holocaust. Thanks. I listened very intently and to the Solicitor General, and he said something that he said sometimes we bump into history, and that's true. As I was sitting listening, I was thinking, I'm a farm boy from Northern Ontario. What am I doing speaking in a place like this about a tragedies that are happening in the Middle East? The one thing I would like to say from the top, that Hamas is a terrorist organization. And it terrorized the people of Israel, and it terrorizes the people of Palestine. The way I got into politics, I relate everything to personal experiences. I'm not Jewish. A non-Jew could never understand the persecution of the Jewish people. But I'd like to relay something that happened to me as a small child. That was the closest I could ever come. Many people have heard me talk about my father, but I've never told this because So, my father was in Holland in World War II, and this isn't about my father, and he never talked about World War II. And many people who've gone through calamities, don't talk about what they've gone through. My dad had a very difficult personality. He was God to me. I followed him everywhere. We were at a cattle auction, and the man next to him was Jewish. I didn't know that at the time. I was about 10 or 11. And he was wearing long sleeves. And my dad was talking to him. I'm a kid. I'm watching the cows go through the ring. But he lifted up his sleeve. And my dad started crying. He was also a survivor. I'd never seen my dad cry before. And I looked at my dad's face, and I was incredibly confused. And I looked at the other man's face. I can't describe the look in his face. I still remember it. I remembered it on October 7th. It was a look of horror and resolve. Someone who had been to hell and survived and was never going to let that happen again. And I think that is as close as I can come to having any knowledge of what Jewish people have faced through history, have faced through time. The look on that survivor's face. It wasn't the same look of sorrow and pain of my father. It was a look of horror and resolve to never let it happen again to his people. It is hard to be angelic in times like that. I appreciated the words from the Solicitor General. My dad never talked about what happened that day. I came home and asked my mom about it, and she told me about World War II, about the Holocaust. It wasn't something that was discussed in our house. The only thing that my dad ever said, and there's no Dutch translation here, so I'm not going to say it in Dutch, but the Jews will never back up. They can't back up. And I think that is where we are today. So that's a face I can't get out of my head. But there's other faces I can't get out of my head. And before I continue, I'd like to just say that the one incredible thing about being in this house and being in this province and being in this country, that we can talk about tough issues that cause wars in other places, and here we actually can talk about them. My son-in-law is Lebanese. He has a different view of what's happening in the Middle East. He was at my place at Thanksgiving, and we watched it. He was as horrified about the terrorist attacks as I was. And if he was standing here, he would also say, Hamas is a terrorist organization. I went to Lebanon two summers ago. My grandson was christened in Lebanon in a Greek Orthodox church in Lebanon. And I saw Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. And I looked in those people's faces as well. And in their faces, I saw hopelessness. Complete, utter hopelessness. They weren't, at least from what I saw, all they want is to what we all want, to raise our families in peace. And I thought about that as I was watching on TV, as everyone else was watching on TV. And we have in the Middle East, based on we have people who have to defend, have gone through the horror of people of having to defend their right to exist, and feeling they have to do so at all costs. And on the other side, people who, and perhaps I think they're all on the same side. I think everyone, in my humble opinion, and it is a humble opinion, because I am the last person you want to listen to as knowing anything really of what's truly going on in the Middle East. But the vast majority of people want to live in peace. It's not an easy situation. It isn't. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It did acts of terror. The Palestinian people are also suffering for those acts of terror. And I think we need, and that was expressed by the government side. I respect that. I respect that. it's such a complicated place, the birthplace of many faiths, and a bastion for the Jewish people. But there are many people who live there. And it is incumbent on all of us who live in a democracy, who have the ability to agree to disagree, to make sure that we actually try to lessen the temperature and try to come to resolutions. It's not easy. It's not going to happen this morning. It's not. But we all need to realize that our words have impact on people who are dying on all sides. And dying isn't a side. So I'd like to turn the floor over to the member from Scarborough Southwest. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. And thank you